After being locked away for over a decade, a banned Ghost Adventures episode just surfaced online, and what it shows is absolutely terrifying. We're talking about an investigation so dangerous that the Travel Channel refused to air it and ordered all footage destroyed. An episode where Zak Bagans and his crew encountered something so malevolent that crew members were hospitalized, possessed, and psychologically destroyed. The location was so evil that Zak himself said they should never have gone there and vowed never to return. For years, the network denied this episode even existed, threatening legal action against anyone who mentioned it. But leaked footage has finally emerged, and it reveals the darkest moment in Ghost Adventures history. What did they find that was too disturbing for television? Hit subscribe because what we're about to reveal will change everything you thought you knew about paranormal investigation. Ghost Adventures premiered on the Travel Channel in 2008 and quickly became the most aggressive, confrontational paranormal investigation show on television. Led by Zak Bagans, along with Nick Groff and Aaron Goodwin, the crew didn't just observe paranormal activity. They deliberately provoked spirits, challenged demons, and pushed investigations to dangerous extremes that other shows wouldn't dare attempt. The format was simple but intense. The crew would lock themselves inside haunted locations for entire nights with no escape route, using cutting-edge paranormal investigation equipment and confrontational tactics designed to force spirits to reveal themselves. Unlike the British politeness of most haunted, Ghost Adventures brought an American aggression. Zak would taunt entities, dare them to attack, and refuse to back down even when things got violent. Over the years, Ghost Adventures investigated hundreds of locations: haunted asylums, demon houses, ancient battlefields, murder sites, and places with documented histories of dark occult practices. The show built a reputation for capturing some of the most compelling paranormal evidence on television: full-bodied apparitions, violent poltergeist activity, demonic possessions, and physical attacks on crew members. But there was one investigation that went so catastrophically wrong that it nearly ended the show permanently. In 2010, during the show's third season, the Ghost Adventures crew traveled to an undisclosed location in Eastern Europe, a place with such a dark history that even locals refused to speak about it directly. The location was a former monastery that had been converted into a mental asylum in the 18th century, then used as a prison and execution site during World War II, and finally abandoned after a series of mysterious deaths in the 1960s. The building had triple-layered trauma, centuries of religious oppression, decades of psychiatric abuse and experimental treatments, and wartime atrocities including torture and mass executions. Paranormal investigators who'd attempted to explore the location previously reported overwhelming negative energy, violent attacks, and psychological breakdowns that lasted long after leaving the premises. Zak Bagans was obsessed with investigating this location. He'd heard stories about it for years, tales of demonic entities, portals to other dimensions, and spirits so malevolent that they could follow investigators home and destroy their lives. Against the advice of local experts, religious authorities, and even his own crew members, Zak insisted on moving forward with the investigation. The production company and Travel Channel were hesitant, but ultimately approved the investigation with strict conditions: extra medical staff on standby, multiple escape routes identified, and a local priest available for emergency spiritual intervention if needed. The crew flew to Eastern Europe with their equipment, signed additional liability waivers, and prepared for what Zak called the most important investigation of our careers. What happened during those 2 nights changed everyone involved. The footage captured was so disturbing, so apparently genuine in its display of malevolent paranormal activity, that network executives made the unprecedented decision to ban the episode entirely and order all footage locked away indefinitely. Crew members signed expanded NDAs with severe financial penalties for discussing what they experienced. The investigation was scrubbed from production records, removed from schedules, and officially denied. For over a decade, this banned episode existed only in rumors and whispered stories from people connected to the production. Until now. The monastery-turned-asylum-turned-prison sat on the outskirts of a small village whose name has been deliberately obscured in all leaked documentation. Local residents refused to go near the building after dark, and even in daylight, most would take long detours to avoid passing it. The structure dated back to the 1300s, built by a monastic order that practiced extreme forms of self-mortification and believed physical suffering brought them closer to God. Historical records revealed the monastery had a dark secret. The monks practiced ritualistic torture on themselves and on possessed villagers brought to them for exorcism. Dozens of people died during these brutal exorcism rituals, their bodies buried in unmarked graves beneath the monastery. By the 1700s, the monastery was abandoned after multiple monks went insane and killed themselves in grotesque ways. In 1780, the building was converted into an asylum for the criminally insane. This was the era of brutal psychiatric treatments. Patients were chained in cells, subjected to ice baths, bloodletting, starvation, and experimental surgeries, including primitive lobotomies. Records show over 300 patients died in the asylum between 1780 and 1920, many from the treatments themselves. Former staff members reported that screaming could be heard throughout the building day and night, and several doctors and nurses committed suicide after working there. The darkest chapter came during World War II, when occupying forces converted the asylum into an interrogation and execution facility. Hundreds of prisoners, resistance fighters, political dissidents, and civilians were tortured for information and then executed in the basement. Survivors described the building as a factory of suffering, where screams echoed constantly and the smell of death permeated every room. After the war, the building was briefly reopened as a psychiatric facility, but a series of mysterious deaths forced its permanent closure in 1967. In a single month, 4 staff members died under unexplained circumstances. 1 fell from a window, 2 died from sudden heart attacks despite being young and healthy, and 1 simply disappeared, their body never found. Patients reported seeing shadowy figures, hearing voices commanding them to hurt themselves and others, and experiencing violent nightmares that felt completely real. When Ghost Adventures arrived in 2010, the building had been abandoned for over 40 years. It was structurally unsound, filled with debris and decay, and completely isolated from the nearest inhabited buildings. Local paranormal investigators warned Zach that the location wasn't just haunted, it was cursed. They spoke of an accumulation of evil from centuries of suffering, torture, and death that had created something far worse than individual ghosts. One local researcher told Zach that the building contained a portal, a permanent opening to a dark spiritual realm that allowed malevolent entities to cross into our world. He warned that investigating there wouldn't just disturb spirits. It would invite demons to attach themselves to the crew and follow them home. Multiple psychics who'd visited the location refused to enter the building, claiming they could feel the malevolence radiating from it even from hundreds of feet away. Zach dismissed these warnings as superstition and local legend. He'd investigated dangerous locations before and always emerged unscathed. He was confident in his equipment, his experience, and his ability to handle whatever they encountered. This confidence would prove to be catastrophic. The Ghost Adventures crew arrived at the location in late afternoon, giving themselves time to set up equipment before darkness fell. From the moment they entered the building, something felt different. Aaron Goodwin, usually the comic relief of the crew, became uncharacteristically quiet and refused to joke around. He later described feeling an immediate sense of dread, like walking into a place where he wasn't welcome and something dangerous was watching. The crew set up their standard array of equipment: digital voice recorders for capturing EVPs, electronic voice phenomena, full-spectrum cameras to detect apparitions, EMF meters to measure electromagnetic fields, motion sensors, and a central command station where producers could monitor all feeds simultaneously. They also brought specialized equipment for this investigation: a SLS, structured light sensor, camera that maps human-shaped figures invisible to the naked eye, and a geoport device designed to facilitate real-time spirit communication. As sunset approached, Zach conducted his standard pre-investigation interview, where he explains the location's history and what they expect to encounter. But watching the leaked footage, you can see he's already affected. His usual bravado seems forced, and he keeps glancing over his shoulder as if sensing something behind him. At one point, he stops mid-sentence and asks the camera operator, "Did you hear that?" though nothing is audible on the recording. The investigation officially began at 9 p.m., when the crew locked themselves inside with no exit until dawn. Within the first hour, equipment started malfunctioning in ways the crew had never experienced. Cameras would shut off randomly despite fresh batteries, then turn back on pointing in different directions. Audio recorders captured what sounded like whispered conversations in multiple languages, including Latin, German, and languages nobody could identify. The SLS camera immediately detected multiple human-shaped figures throughout the building, far more than the crew had ever seen at any location. These figures weren't static. They moved with apparent purpose, following crew members, blocking doorways, and at times appearing to reach out toward investigators. Most disturbing was that the SLS figures sometimes appeared in groups, huddled together as if watching the crew. In the basement, the former execution chamber, the activity intensified dramatically. The temperature dropped so rapidly that the crew could see their breath, despite it being summer. EMF meters spiked to levels that shouldn't be possible in a building with no electrical power. Most shocking was the geoport, which began producing clear, intelligent responses to Zach's questions. When Zach asked, "Who are you?" the device responded with a male voice saying, "Legion," a biblical reference to demons. When he asked what they wanted, the response was chilling. "You." The device then produced sounds that resembled screaming mixed with laughter, so disturbing that Aaron physically backed away from it. Then came the physical phenomena. A heavy metal door that the crew had propped open slammed shut with tremendous force, trapping Nick Groff alone in a cell. As Nick tried to open the door, cameras captured it being held shut from the other side by an invisible force. You could see the door handle turning as Nick tried it, but the door wouldn't budge. When it finally opened, Nick emerged pale and shaking, claiming he'd felt hands touching him in the darkness. The breaking point of the first night came around 2 a.m. Zach was conducting a solo investigation in the former monastery chapel when he began acting strangely. His speech became slurred, his movements erratic, and he started speaking in a voice that didn't sound like his own. The camera captured him having a conversation with something invisible, responding to questions nobody else could hear, and becoming increasingly agitated. When Aaron and Nick rushed to check on him, they found Zach standing motionless in the center of the chapel, staring at the ceiling with completely black eyes, a phenomenon they'd never witnessed before. When they called his name, he didn't respond. When they physically touched him, he turned toward them with the expression of pure hatred and lunged forward as if to attack before suddenly collapsing. After Zach collapsed in the chapel, the crew seriously considered aborting the investigation and getting him to a hospital, but when he regained consciousness, he claimed to have no memory of what had just happened and insisted they continue. Against their better judgment, Nick and Aaron agreed, though they made Zach promise not to investigate alone for the rest of the night. But something had changed in Zach. Crew members watching from the command center noticed his behavior becoming increasingly aggressive and erratic. He started taunting the spirits with unusual viciousness, using provocations he'd never used before. Blasphemous statements, challenges that seemed designed to invite the darkest possible entities to manifest. Around 3 a.m., Zach announced he was going to attempt a full evocation, deliberately inviting any entity present to possess him so they could communicate directly. Nick and Aaron protested, saying this violated their standard safety protocols, but Zach became angry and insisted. Watching the leaked footage, you can see genuine fear on Nick's face as he realizes Zach isn't acting like himself. What happened next is the most disturbing footage in Ghost Adventures history. Zach sat in the center of the former torture chamber, surrounded by EVP recorders and cameras, and verbally invited any spirit present to come inside me and speak through me. Within seconds, his body language completely changed. His posture shifted, his facial expression twisted into something cruel and predatory, and when he spoke, the voice was different, deeper, with an accent that sounded Eastern European. The entity speaking through Zach identified itself as a former SS officer who had tortured and executed prisoners in that very room during World War II. It described atrocities in graphic detail, specific torture methods, the names of victims, how they screamed and begged. It bragged about the suffering it had caused and expressed no remorse. Most chillingly, it said it had remained in the building after death because it enjoyed watching new victims suffer, meaning anyone who entered became a target. The possession lasted nearly 20 minutes. During that time, Zach taunted Nick and Aaron, revealed personal information about their lives he shouldn't know, and made threats about what would happen to them and their families. When they tried to end the session, the entity refused to leave, saying, "This body is mine now." It took intervention from the priest on standby, who performed emergency prayers and spiritual commands, before Zach finally collapsed and the entity apparently departed. When Zach came to, he had no memory of the possession but was left with mysterious scratches on his chest, forming symbols nobody could identify. Despite the traumatic possession incident, the crew made the catastrophic decision to continue the investigation for a second night. The Travel Channel executives monitoring the feeds remotely urged them to abort, but Zach insisted they needed to return, and confront what we started. This decision would lead to footage so disturbing that the network would later claim it was too dangerous to ever broadcast. During the second night, the paranormal activity escalated to levels that defied explanation. Multiple cameras captured the same full-bodied apparition simultaneously. A figure in military uniform walking through rooms, observing the crew, and at times appearing to give orders to invisible subordinates. Thermal imaging showed the figure had a distinct heat signature, which shouldn't be possible for a spirit. But the most shocking footage came from a locked room in the basement where the crew had set up a stationary camera. The room had been completely empty when they sealed it, with all entrances monitored. Yet when they reviewed the footage later, it showed furniture moving on its own, stacking into a pile in the center of the room, then bursting apart violently. Objects appeared to levitate and hover for extended periods before being thrown against walls with tremendous force. Most disturbing was what happened when Aaron was sent alone into the former morgue area for a solo investigation. Multiple cameras recorded him entering an empty room, then suddenly being lifted off the ground by an invisible force and thrown backward against a wall so hard that he suffered a concussion and cracked ribs. Frame-by-frame analysis shows no wires, no human intervention. Aaron is simply lifted and thrown as if grabbed by something massive and incredibly strong. The incident that forced immediate evacuation occurred around 4 a.m. All three investigators were in the main hall when every piece of electronic equipment simultaneously shut down. Cameras, recorders, lights, everything. In the complete darkness, they heard what they described as hundreds of voices, screaming in unison, a sound so loud and overwhelming that it was physically painful. When equipment suddenly powered back on moments later, the footage showed all three investigators curled on the floor, covering their ears, clearly in distress. But most shocking was what the cameras captured in that brief darkness. Using infrared and full-spectrum imaging, dozens, possibly hundreds, of human-shaped figures crowded around the crew, reaching toward them, mouths open as if screaming. The crew evacuated immediately, breaking their lockdown protocol for the first time in Ghost Adventures history. The immediate aftermath of the investigation was catastrophic for everyone involved. Aaron Goodwin was hospitalized with his physical injuries but also reported severe psychological trauma, nightmares, paranoia, and intrusive thoughts about the location that persisted for months. He told close friends that he felt like something had followed him home from Eastern Europe, that he'd wake up feeling pressure on his chest and smelling the decay from the abandoned building. Nick Groff experienced something even more disturbing. Within days of returning home, his family reported that he'd become withdrawn, aggressive, and would have violent outbursts completely out of character. His wife claimed he would wake up screaming in languages he didn't speak, and had developed an irrational fear of being alone in his own house. Nick himself later admitted that he seriously considered leaving Ghost Adventures entirely after this investigation, feeling that they'd crossed a line that endangered not just themselves, but their families. Zach Boggins suffered the worst effects. Beyond the physical scratches that appeared during his possession, marks that took weeks to fully heal and left permanent scars, he reported experiencing what he believed were demonic attachments. He described feeling constantly watched, hearing voices, and experiencing episodes where he'd lose time and have no memory of what he'd done. Objects in his house would move on their own. Electronics would malfunction, and he reported seeing shadow figures in his peripheral vision. Most concerning were the personality changes. Friends and crew members noticed Zach becoming increasingly obsessed with dark occult subjects, more reckless in investigations, and showing signs of what some described as possession symptoms even weeks after leaving the location, speaking in different voices during sleep, having knowledge of historical events he'd never studied, and expressing thoughts and beliefs that contradicted his known personality. Multiple crew members who worked on the production side but never entered the building reported experiencing negative effects just from handling the footage. Editors claimed to have nightmares about the investigation, hear unexplained sounds in their editing bays, and experience equipment malfunctions that only occurred when working on this particular episode. 2 crew members quit Ghost Adventures entirely after this investigation, citing concerns that the show had become too dangerous and that Zach's increasingly aggressive tactics were attracting entities that were beyond their ability to safely handle. The official reason given for banning the episode, that it was too disturbing for broadcast standards, was only part of the truth. Leaked internal documents and testimony from former Travel Channel executives reveal the real reasons were far more complex and concerning. First, there were serious legal liabilities. Aaron's hospitalization and documented physical injuries raised questions about duty of care and whether the production company had adequately protected its employees. Legal counsel warned that broadcasting an episode where a crew member was visibly injured by paranormal activity could open the network to massive lawsuits if viewers attempted to recreate the investigation and were harmed. More significantly, psychological consultants who reviewed the footage warned that broadcasting certain segments could trigger serious psychological distress in vulnerable viewers. The possession footage in particular was deemed potentially harmful to people with mental health conditions, religious trauma, or susceptibility to suggestion. The network feared being held responsible if viewers experienced psychological breaks after watching. There were also political considerations. The investigation took place in a location with sensitive World War II history, and broadcasting footage that appeared to show a former SS officer's spirit bragging about war crimes raised diplomatic concerns. The government of the host country reportedly pressured the travel channel through diplomatic channels to suppress the episode to avoid reopening painful historical wounds. Insurance companies that covered the production threatened to cancel policies if the episode aired, arguing that it would encourage copycat investigations at dangerous locations and increase liability exposure. The financial pressure from insurers was reportedly a major factor in the decision to ban the episode. Perhaps most disturbing were reports from religious organizations. Multiple Catholic priests and religious scholars who viewed the footage claimed it showed genuine demonic activity and warned that broadcasting it could have spiritual consequences. While the network didn't officially acknowledge these concerns, internal emails show that executives took the warning seriously. Finally, there was concern about Zach Bagans himself. Medical and psychological evaluations after the investigation showed signs of genuine trauma and possible dissociative symptoms. Broadcasting an episode where the host appeared to experience legitimate psychological harm could damage both his career and the show's future viability. For over a decade, the banned episode existed only in rumors and secondhand accounts from people involved in the production. But in late 2023, portions of the footage began appearing on obscure paranormal forums and file-sharing sites. The leaks appeared to come from multiple sources, suggesting that several people with access to the archived footage decided independently to release it. The leaked material includes approximately 40 minutes of rough footage from the two-night investigation, though the full investigation reportedly produced over 12 hours of recorded material. What's been released is enough to verify many of the stories that had been dismissed as exaggeration or fabrication. The possession footage is particularly disturbing. You can see Zach's physical transformation, his facial muscles contorting, his eyes appearing to change color, though this could be lighting effects, and his voice becoming genuinely different. Most chilling is watching Nick and Aaron's reactions. Their fear appears completely genuine, and at several points they're clearly discussing whether to physically restrain Zach for his own safety. The footage of Aaron being thrown in the morgue is perhaps the most compelling evidence. Multiple camera angles captured the same event simultaneously, ruling out camera tricks or editing manipulation. You can see Aaron standing in an empty room, then suddenly jerked backward and upward before being violently thrown. His scream is genuine terror, and the sound of his body hitting the wall is sickening. The fact that he suffered real injuries, documented by medical professionals, makes this footage particularly significant. Equally disturbing is the infrared footage from the mass equipment failure incident. The swarm of human-shaped figures surrounding the crew is unlike anything captured on paranormal television before. The figures move with apparent intelligence and coordination, and several appear to be reaching directly toward crew members' faces. Enhancement of the footage shows facial features and details that are far too complex to be camera artifacts or misidentification. The audio from the investigation is perhaps most disturbing. EVP recordings captured voices responding to questions in real time, using information they couldn't have known. Most chilling is audio captured during Zach's possession, where you can clearly hear two voices speaking simultaneously from his mouth, his own voice trying to speak overlaid with the deeper, accented voice of the entity. Analysis by audio forensics experts confirmed the two-voice phenomenon wasn't the result of editing or audio manipulation. It was present in the original raw recording. What really happened at that location? Whether you believe in genuine demonic possession or extreme psychological trauma, the effects were real. Aaron's injuries were documented. The crew's psychological damage lasted years. Nick Groff left the show. Zach was never the same. Some places are too evil to investigate.